Our next guest in the studio with us, his name is Michael Broadbridge. He's been an assistant coach at AFL level before, and he is with us over the course of the next month to break down each of the 9 finals games that are ahead of us. And we've also got a little bit of AFL news that we can bounce off him. If you've got a question for him on the Retrovision text line 0427 789 571, you can send it on in. We'll break down, we'll tell you who wins and why. Michael, a very good morning to you and great to have you in the studio.
Yeah, thanks very much, guys. Great to be in here, and it's exciting leading into a finals week, particularly after a bye, right? The bye is so deflating, isn't it? Everyone's pumped after the last round of the season, and all of a sudden go away for a long weekend and forget about AFL. That's weird. I don't get it.
I'm with you. Tim and I are in a different side of the argument here, but I think a lot of people have that view because there was so much momentum. We were ready to rock and roll after nearly 90,000 at the MCG decided who was playing finals, and then we've just hit pause. We've been treading water.
Yeah, it's very divisive. Look, lots of people think in different ways about the bye, but I'm a purist, I suppose. I've been around for long enough, and I'm a bit of a history sort of guy, and I think at the end of the home and away, there's nothing better than rolling into the first week of finals the following week.
Couldn't agree with you more. What about the pre-grand final bye with this 12-day stand down with concussion?
I don't mind that.
Yeah.
Right? I don't mind that. The reason being is twofold. For the reason you just said, the 12-day concussion, I think that gives those guys with that slight head knock the chance to get up for the final. But also, it's a week where you can focus on the Brownlow medal and the festivities around, the grand final and the best player in the competition. There's enough to get you through that 2 weeks, the build-up, the hype. We saw it last year, didn't we, with the forced layoff before the final with COVID. And the hype over here in Perth was enormous for that 2 weeks. You can multiply that by 20 if it's in Melbourne, right, because of the hype and the events, and people would go to Melbourne for that 10-day period leading up to the final as opposed to just the week of the grand final. So I don't mind that idea. I really don't. But yeah, Gillan McLaughlin's pretty strong and the AFL seem pretty strong with what they've got. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I wonder if the new CEO will address that question this time next year and maybe go down that pre-grand final bye path. One thing that has, certainly the pre-finals bye has helped, and that is that Tom Papley will be able to play for Sydney. We'll talk about that game very, very shortly. But we get underway with an absolute ripper on Thursday night up there at the Gabba. The Brisbane Lions up against Richmond. So the last time they met Richmond as much as 7 goals down, they come back and win by 7 points. That's at the MCG. Brisbane and Richmond have played qualifying finals at the Gabba recently. They shared them. What was the flinch reaction to this one when you saw it on paper?
Well, seeing it on paper, Brisbane in Brisbane is always your default for mine. It's always, that they're hard to beat up there, particularly when they're going well. But then when you do the analysis and you go through the data and the fact that it's a night game, which we'll talk about as well, and the conditions, etc., and Richmond's form leading into the bye was strong and building. So there's some factors there which sort of start to get you to think that perhaps Richmond, go into this game as slight favourites. And I think Brisbane will be wounded by their performance against Melbourne a couple of weeks ago. They'll be desperate to atone for it, but there'll be some mental demons off the back of that. They really did get blown away. And, at this time of the season, going into these games, there's the physical element as much as the emotional and the mental element. And how can you manage the emotions and the motivation of the players to go out there and perform. And I just feel at the moment that Richmond are holding a slight advantage over Brisbane. There's a lot of mechanics to the game, which we'll talk about, but it's an exciting game, perhaps the closest game out of all 4 for mine this weekend.
If you're Chris Fagan, how, after 23 rounds of the season, Michael, can you, again, no Marcus Adams this week because of concussion. In fact, he's done for the year because of that concussion. How can you address your defence, which has been sloppy? It has been sloppy, not just the last 6-8 weeks. It's been sloppy all year. They leak goals. Yeah. How can you address that? How can you turn it around in the space of 10 days?
Well, I don't think you can, right? So it's a personnel factor, that they've got the players they've got. They're not going to bring anyone in. You've mentioned Adams is out. They've got the back 7 that they've got. So you've got your personnel, which you can't change in 2 weeks. So you've got to deal with that. You can make some slight adjustments in terms of how you would like them to play, but in reality, it's not going to change too much. From a systems perspective, likewise, you can't do much in 2 weeks. You've played the same way the whole season. Brisbane are ranked number 9 in the AFL for points against. they're no good at defending, right, in terms of the top 4. And history shows you need to be in the top 3 defensively to win a grand final in the AFL.
So how do they get through? So why has this team been able to progress to this stage? Why hasn't that been addressed throughout the course of the season?
Good question. There's other teams in the same boat. You know, Richmond aren't that great defensively either. So we'll get onto that in a minute. Both of these sides have problems defensively. There's a real balance. There's a yin and yang in the way you play football, right? You attack and you defend, and when the ball's stationary, you get set up for both, all right? What you can find sometimes, if you focus too much on one, the other slips. And I think Fremantle are in a similar boat. They're very good defensively, but not that great offensively. So they're still trying to get that balance of their game. You know, if you go too hard offensively, you can leave yourself open defensively. And I think that's what's happened at Brisbane. I think they back themselves in from stoppage, Lockie Neal and the like. They're very good at clearing the ball and getting it forward, and they go hard forward. But on the flip side, when the ball hits the deck and they get counter-attacked on, their forwards aren't that great at pressuring. We'll talk about Danaher and Hipwood and those types. They're not that great at putting defensive pressure on, so the ball comes out pretty easy. Their midfielders are a little bit offside. They've run ahead of the play a little bit too much, which leaves their defenders, you know, the Harris Andrews, the Gardners, the Paynes, one-on-one, and they're not that great one-on-one. They're more zoning-type defenders, and zoning-type defenders rely on slow footy coming in, and that's where they get scored against.
They've looked confused also in the back half, haven't they?
Yeah, they've looked. There's been some damning vision, hasn't there, with players sort of turning their back on the ball, looking at, I thought you had him. I thought, and all of a sudden there's a guy leading up, marking the ball 20 metres out straight in front. It's really, it's hard to watch from a football purist point of view when you see that. It does happen, and that's a coaching element, and no doubt they'll be working hard on that. But I think they're only really slight differences they can make to be on their system and their personnel defensively.
Dustin Martin's last couple of finals, 25 disposals and a goal, 21 disposals and 2 goals, and we know that grand final against Geelong, 21 disposals and 4 goals. How much of an impact can we expect him to have on return to this Richmond side?
Well, I think you need to temper your expectations. He's been out for a while, right? Yep. He's had an interrupted year in many ways. He hasn't displayed the form that we know that he's capable of displaying. So as good as he is and as good as he is in September, I think everyone should temper their expectations of Dustin. He's quite likely going to be on reduced minutes, so he'll probably play somewhere between 70% and maybe 80% maximum, I would have thought, game time. And of those 70 minutes, most of it's going to be spent in the forward line, and he'll have little spurts on ball if needed. That's the way I see it. When the ball comes near him, we know he can do anything, right? It's a matter of those opportunities and how many looks he gets one-on-one, and whether Brisbane can actually structure up defensively on him to actually reduce his impact. He's likely to kick a couple of goals, but that's about all, I think. Having said that, it's Dustin Martin. If there's enough supply and it comes in there enough, who knows? You
mentioned the fact that this game's at night. How do you see that influencing the outcome?
Yeah, so night time at the Gabba does tend to get dewy. Looking at the forecast, it looks like it's going to be fine in terms of rain, but that quite often means slippery in terms of dew, right? So fine conditions above head at night time means slippery on the deck. Both of these sides like the contested footy. Richmond aren't so great at clearances. Brisbane are. Richmond score off counter-attack. They force turnovers across halfback and they go super quick. They're the best team at scoring off turnover. So it's likely to be a contested slogfest. I don't see it being a high possession game, which I think favours Richmond to tell you the truth in terms of their style of play. They'd like to surge the ball forward, minimum fuss, high efficiency, and score very well when they go inside 50. They've got a pretty potent forward line, and I don't think that Brisbane necessarily will be able to counter some of those guys in their forward line, Rioli, Bolton, etc. So contested, not very high possession game, I think goes against Brisbane.
Okay, so the Tigers to win the second elimination final.
Yeah, I'm tipping the Tigers. I'm not tipping it by a big margin. I think for mine, it's somewhere between 6 to sort of 15 points. It's that 2 to less than 3 goal margin.
All right. Well, Friday night at the MCG, the second qualifying final, Melbourne up against Sydney. The last time they met, that was at the MCG as well, and Sydney overran the D's to win 10-13 to 9 goals 7. How much does that weigh on Friday night, the fact that Sydney have been to the G and done it?
Yeah, probably a little bit. You do get confidence from venues. There's no doubt. You do develop confidence when you've had success, particularly in big games. Teams develop this psyche about them. We play well on the road. Some teams play really well on the road. Other teams don't. We play well at the G. Some teams play well on the wide expanses of the G. Other teams don't. So it does enter your mindset, and the coaches feed off that. You actually coach it into the players that we are really good in these conditions. So no doubt Sydney will recognise that. They'll arrive with confidence, right? But they're coming up against a side who I think is just peaking at the right time of the year. So it's going to be an absolute rip snorter of a game. Neither side really tags that much. Sydney have got something up their sleeve, I reckon, which they can throw at Melbourne, but Melbourne will go out there and play their own way. Sydney have got a couple of different gears that they play. They're an interesting side, Sydney. We've seen them hold the ball a little bit at times and deny the opposition the ball, and I think that they've got the potential to do that against Melbourne. Melbourne are a great defensive side, ranked number 1 in the AFL for points against. They're hard to score against, and they're very good off the turnover. So they force a turnover, they go bang. Fritsch gets on the end of it, kicks a goal. They're very good at scoring off the turnover. And I reckon Sydney, probably have under Longmire have been so good at changing their gears in terms of how they play. They can go quick, streaming, running, carrying the ball through the corridor, or they can go slow and deny the opposition the ball. I think they'll throw a bit of both at Melbourne, and I wouldn't be surprised if the conditions are good. There's a chance of rain, I think, on Friday night, but if the conditions are fine, I wouldn't be surprised if they deny Melbourne the ball as much as they can on Friday night.
When you've got a side such as Melbourne who are so proficient defensively, and we know that they can intercept like May, like Lever, what's the key? Is it separation? Is it honouring that hit-up lead? How do you go about planning for their back six?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Diggers, and it's probably one of the hardest things in footy. We've seen McGovern do it at the Eagles for so long, and you can't tell me that teams don't go into the games against West Coast saying you can't kick the ball high to the West Coast defenders and Barrass and McGovern. It's likewise with May and Lever at Melbourne. Every team would be talking about it, yet we see it every week. So it's a very difficult puzzle to solve. It's a combination of things, right? It's recognising the times to go quick and the times to hold up and shift the ball and change the lines of the ball, all right? And that's very circumstantial. It's very difficult to put yourself in the player's shoes on the ground and have them make the right decision every time. And that's why it's such an asset to have players like May and Lever, because they collectively can make it so difficult for opposition sides to score.
Finals football, more intensity, more pressure, therefore perhaps more dump kicks, which works in the favour of Lever and May and the like.
Yeah, it does. And, Sydney with Franklin and Reid in particular and Heaney, they'll keep them honest, right? So they're not playing on duds this week. They're not going to be able to stand off 15, 20 metres and play the game the way they want to play. Sydney will be looking for Franklin. So if you're not on him, they'll hit him up.
Yeah.
So they're going to keep them honest. But one of the keys with both May and Lever is it's okay to be beaten in the contest. You can't be outmarked. You got to bring the ball to ground. And that is something that the forwards coaches at Sydney will be talking to their forward line about. It's okay. When the dump kicks come in, the long kicks come in, that's fine. Bring the ball to ground. Just don't be outmarked. And when we bring it to ground, that brings into play the Papleys and the smaller forwards for Sydney, Heaney, Clark, etc., who are great at ground level.
What about the other end of the ground? Would you bring in Tom McDonald off the back of one VFL game?
No, I wouldn't. I think particularly off the form that they displayed against Brisbane 2 weeks ago, I'd find it very hard to change anything from that side. So I definitely wouldn't bring him in. I think Brown provides that sort of X factor. He can be really good or he can be pretty average. We know that, but sometimes he only, in 10 minutes he can take a couple of marks. He's a very accurate shot on goal. So Brown is your second stringer to Fritsch. Fritsch is an interesting player because he's a mid-sized guy. He's kicked 50 goals. It's quite amazing. Like, you look at Bailey Fritsch, I think he was a rookie selection, I think, so he'd been overlooked for many years playing in the VFL, and people are probably saying, he's not super quick or this or that or whatever else. I tell you what, though, at AFL level, he knows how to play. He's a master at getting on the end of the ball off a turnover, so the ball gets turned over somewhere up the ground, and because the opposition side have sort of moved with the footy, as that ball gets turned over, Bailey Fritsch is a master at finding space, running back to goal, and that's how he kicks most of his goals. So if I'm coaching against Bailey Fritsch, I'm saying when we have the ball, you can't afford to run off Bailey Fritsch. You've got to actually stay as close to him as you can, because he'll get on the way back. You know, he's a good player.
Michael, question for you. Why has there been such reticence from Simon Goodwin and the coaching staff at Melbourne to have Angus Brayshaw running through the midfield? We saw him, feature very prominently in a Brownlow medal as a younger midfielder many years ago now.
Yeah.
I know they've had issues with their Hibberd and the like, but playing off halfback, since he's gone in the midfield, he finds the football as well as anyone.
Yeah, well, he's not only that, he's number 3 in the competition for intercept marks.
Yep.
So as a midfielder, he's almost like the traditional soccer holding midfielder. He's a defensive midfielder. He shuffles across, he slides back, he intercepts, he sets up play in the back half for them. I don't know why they've sort of, over the course of the last couple of seasons, shifted him. But the answer always lies in what's best for the team. And
Yep.
Melbourne have a fantastic structure of roles, right? So they play roles. We see Langdon on the wing, running up and down one side of the ground the whole game. Doesn't rotate, he plays his role. Brayshaw plays his role wherever he's told to play. They have their stars, but they have this array of role players, and if you walk past them in the street, you wouldn't know who they were. Last year when they won the grand final, I looked out as they were handing out the medals, and there were 6 or 8 guys there. I'm thinking, I don't even know who that is.
Yeah.
But gee whiz, they're good players.
Yeah.
And that's why I think Brayshaw is one of those guys. He'll do whatever is required, and don't you love players like that?
Star.
Yeah.
So coming into form at the right time of the year, is that the way that you lean then on Friday night with the Demons?
It is. Look, I still, I see Geelong and Melbourne as the 2, right, at the moment, absolutely. So on that note, I'm tipping Melbourne to beat Sydney. If wet, Sydney won't play how they want to play if it's wet. So I think Melbourne and, once again, a close-ish sort of game, 17, 18 points.
All right. The first of Saturday's finals is the first qualifying final between Geelong and Collingwood. The last time they met, Collingwood led by as much as 37 points in the third quarter before the Cats steamed home off the back of Jeremy Cameron, 16 goals 8 to 13 goals 13, Diggers.
I need to ask Michael, is the way Collingwood go about it and the fact that they aren't all that proficient at contested ball and clearances, is that going to be sustainable in September?
No.
I know Richmond, when they were winning flags, weren't the most effective in that area either.
Not, yeah.
But Collingwood, they ask a lot of their defence.
Oh, it's not just the contested stuff. You're right. They're ranked number 14 in the comp for clearances.
Yeah.
So they're in the bottom 4 for clearances, which when you think of how you score in a game of footy, right, there's only 2 ways that you can score. One is from a clearance and the other is from a turnover. And people say, well, what about a kick in? Well, I classify a kick in as a turnover. You kick a point, you give the opposition the ball, right? So 2/3 of your scores come from turnovers traditionally, 1/3 from clearances. Collingwood are ranked number 14 in that third, right? They're not great at that part of the game. In fact, statistically, they're middle of the road or worse in just about every key category except wins.
Yeah.
They keep winning by small margins. It's phenomenal. I coached a few years ago in the Waffle. I coached Claremont one season. I think we had 6 losses of single-digit margins in the season, right? And I came away from that end of that season thinking, if only, right? We were devastated. We were that close, but not quite. Collingwood are the opposite. They're winning these games by single-digit margins. It can't hold up for the finals. Now, I'm the master of making big statements, right? But, they come out and beat Geelong and who knows, but, surely not. Surely not. Geelong have been top 4 out of the last 5 years in the AFL, right? Statistically fantastic. They're solid number 3 offense, number 3 defense. They tick all the boxes. It's their year to shine. They have to beat Collingwood on Saturday.
They defend better this year, it seems, without the ball. Like, they don't sort of retain possession as much as what we've seen previously from Geelong side. In saying that, their defensive profile's outstanding, and offensively, with the addition of Stengel as that small forward at the feet of Cameron, who's had a wonderful year, and obviously Tom Hawkins. So they tick a lot of boxes, don't they?
Yeah, well, they have. They've recruited unbelievably well. If ever you wanted to copy a blueprint of how to draft and trade, Stephen Wells at Geelong, here it is. Just do what we've done. 7 out of the last 8 years they've made the finals. You look at some of the players they brought into that side. You just mentioned Stengel, 46 goals as a small forward, coming from Adelaide. Amazing job. De Koning through the draft what a star. Full back, holding down a key position player. Henry as an emerging tall defender gets the job done. They're balanced all over the ground. And then you throw in, guys like Gary Rowan as role players up forward. Hawkins Cameron, another traded player, free agent, 59 goals this year. They're just solid all over the ground. They seem to have the balance right. You're right. They have tweaked the way that they play a little bit. They were a little bit stagnant at times, I think, in previous years with their ball movement. And in finals time, it probably caught them out a little bit over possessing. They've sort of changed the balance a little bit this year. They know when to go quick, but they can also go into the hold the ball mode if they need to. So they seem to be in the right place at the right time. Let's just hope for their sake that they can pull it together in September.
Question for you, Michael, when you've coached as an assistant at AFL level, the fact that Geelong have been poor off the bye previously and they've got a somewhat sketchy finals record after what they were able to achieve in 2011 for Chris Scott, his first year, is that spoken about in the lead up to the first final? Do they not pay any credence to that?
No, I don't think they speak about it. Guys like Joel Selwood in particular, Dangerfield, others that have been there for a while, internally will know and they'll be burning and wanting to make amends for it. We know that Dangerfield is yearning a flag. It's the icing on the cake for him in terms of his career. Jeremy Cameron coming through hasn't experienced it either. So they've got some hunger there, but they've also got some experienced guys who have won finals. Hawkins, as we know, Selwood, as we know. So it won't get spoken about. What they'll be talking about is their game and what they do that makes it hard for opposition sides to beat them.
There's every chance that it'll be the biggest crowd here in Australia since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. So who wins it at the MCG on Saturday afternoon?
Well, for mine, this is the one that potentially got a bigger margin attached to it. I'm picking Geelong by 5 goals plus.
Okay, Geelong 5 goals plus off the back of Richmond and Melbourne winning close ones. Michael Broadbridge is with us in the studio, and we are up to the first elimination final Saturday evening here at Optus Stadium. The Fremantle Dockers up against the Western Bulldogs, who got in the last breath as a result of Collingwood's goal there to Jamie Elliott. The Dogs come over to Perth. It feels like they've been here before, Michael. They came over here finishing 7th. They're 8th this time. They did start a run, though, in 2016 in Perth. Is there any signs that something similar could happen?
Well, there is. There's some signs. I think the Bulldogs, at their best, are capable of beating just about anyone the way that they play. So what's happened this year is they haven't brought that game often enough. They've been inconsistent. They haven't been able to string together their very best footy. But on their day, they're a dangerous opposition to play. So Fremantle are going to have to be on their toes. And the forecast worries me, right? It seems to be getting a little bit better, but as a WA person, and I coached at Fremantle many years ago, I'm a little bit concerned if it's wet. That brings the game back into the Bulldogs' favour, in my opinion.
Does that help the Bulldogs, i.e. with their midfield and their contested ball work, or does it negate Fremantle's advantage with their tall forwards, given the issues that the Bulldogs have in their key position personnel?
Yeah, a little bit of both, but let's start with the latter, okay? So Fremantle this year in the wet, I think there's been a lot spoken about. They are the most uncontested team in the competition, so they like uncontested footy. They hold on to the ball. They like to handball. They like to chip it around. Now, we know in wet weather that's not the recipe for success. In wet weather, what you do is you reduce your possession rate and you take territory, and that's not in their DNA. Can they change if it is wet? I'm not sure. They haven't been able to so far this year, right? On the first point that you made, Digby, it certainly does bring the Bulldogs' grunt midfielders into play. Liberatore, we know, loves those sort of conditions. McRae sucks the ball up from ground level better than anyone. Treloar, Bontempelli, Bailey Smith, their midfield brigade in those conditions will really come into play. So the Bulldogs are ranked number 1 in clearances. If it is really wet, the clearance game comes into play a little bit more. Those guys get busy, and I think it makes it hard for Fremantle. So keep a watch on the forecast for Saturday night. Yeah,
so the last time they played, which was only a few weeks ago, so we've got a good sample to work with, which was Fremantle under the roof, 14-12 over the Dogs, 11-13. And does that go to what you said about Fremantle, the uncontested ball? It felt like they were allowed to, for much of that game, do what they want when they had the footy in hand.
Yeah, absolutely, it does. And that's the way Justin's done a fantastic job with Fremantle, and the whole crew at Fremantle have just done such a wonderful job in terms of developing a style of play. there is that balance between offense and defense that they're working on, right? So Fremantle are ranked, number 2 in the comp for points against. Defensively, brilliant. Pearce and Cox, what seasons they've had. Clark's come to Young, the emergence of Chapman. We know Ryan is an out. Defensively, they are completely settled. The other thing they do from a style of play point of view is Fremantle. They roll back their midfield and their half forwards really quickly to get back and make it hard for teams to score. So they've got the defensive blueprint there. What they haven't been able to get 100% right this year is the counter-attack and the offence from clearance and from turnover, all right? And is it a little bit to do with their forward structure, or is it a little bit to do with making adjustments with how high up the ground they're pushing their forwards to help their defence? I think it's probably the latter. I think it becomes too hard for their players to get back into their forward line sometimes when they win the ball to be able to go super quick and score.
How did Justin Longmuir, Peter Bell, those inside the four walls there at Coburn address the emerging hype, the building hype? We've got a sold-out crowd, Optus Stadium. There's an expectation Freo will advance to the semi-final.
Yeah, it's a worry. It is a worry. We live in a cocoon over here. Perth is a long way. I've lived in Melbourne. I've coached in Melbourne. I've coached at a big club in Melbourne. And the environment over there is just this massive bubble of football. All right, and then you've got what's happening in Perth. Sometimes you can go for 5-6 months in Melbourne and not hear one word spoken about WA. Right, there is a massive chasm between the two states. What happens over here is we're a little fishbowl, and we get caught up in hype. And this is an elimination final, right? You're 120 minutes away from your season ending. It's not going to win you a grand final. It just gives you the right to play in another game. So sometimes the hype over here can play against you. We're talking flag mantle. We've got the team, we've got the players, Fife's coming back in, all that sort of stuff. And the reality is it's a game of footy where we need to get down and get dirty and somehow block out that external noise. Now, hopefully, and I'm sure Peter, in his wisdom and the powers that be at Fremantle, will be addressing that internally, because externally, for mine, there's been too much hype about this game.
Does Sam Darcey play forward or back?
That's been the question over East, hasn't it? Yeah. I think Norton would like him to play forward, right?
Yeah.
Because he gives him a chop out. It means that either Pearce or Cox or one or the other has to pick him up. You got Bruce down there as well, so I think Norton's sort of in the ear of the coaching staff saying, please put him in the forward line. Rory Lobb will come back in and play. Logue will play. Do they have the coverage for those two? That'll be the question they'll be asking. And I don't think it looks like Fremantle aren't going to play Taberner. That's the vibe that we're getting. So without Taberner there, it might give them the ability to play him in the forward line.
All right, Fremantle fans that are listening in this morning, they're waiting very eagerly on who you are with in the first elimination final.
Well, I'm tipping Fremantle if it's dry.
Yep.
All right, and then I'm not going to put any chips on the table until about an hour before the game and looking at the radar and the forecast. And if there's rain and if it looks like it's going to be heavy underfoot or wet, I'm going to flip and go the Bulldogs, if you're allowed to do that.
Yeah,
all right, absolutely.
Makes sense.
Absolutely.
No, it makes sense.
Yep.
All right, Michael. Well, there are plenty of text messages coming through on our Retrovision text line this morning. One that you might find interesting if we can ask this of you. It says, do you have a view on the challenges of being a WAFL coach over the past few years? Obviously with East Perth and Perth, the predicament that they find themselves in at the moment.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure of the context of the question if it's the challenge of coaching those two clubs specifically.
So start with that side of it, those two clubs.
Okay. So absolutely, I feel that they are in a very difficult position, both of those clubs. I've coached at Claremont, right, in the Waffle, and I've had a lot to do with most of the other clubs. Claremont have this amazing breeding ground of talent, all right, and they've worked it. They deserve it. They've worked it really well. They've got the western suburbs. They've got the Kimberley region. They've got, the Albany region. It's just a breeding ground of talent. And I saw it come through, and you look at their Colts every year. They've just got great talent coming through. Then you look at Perth and you look at East Perth, and they've got the opposite. It's a bit of a desert. Perth have got some real good talent in the sort of southeastern suburbs, and they work that area as best they can. But to me, it's not an even playing field in that regard. All right. Now, there's probably arguments to say, Claremont have worked their area better than that. I'm not sure. I have no idea who's worked what area better and the decisions that have been made. But the result is Perth have played finals once in the last 25 years. You know, like it's not what we want to see. So something needs to be addressed. I know they've made some adjustments to the points and all that sort of stuff. Gary Moss is a fantastic guy, great football brain, one of the smartest guys I've had stuff to do with in footy, and I'm sure he would have tried his absolute heart out to change things at Perth. They got decimated with injuries this year. Anyway, East Perth in a similar boat. I think Jeremy Barnett's done a great job there. He's brought them up. And remember, a few years ago, they were down and out after their amalgamation with or alignment with the Eagles. You know, they were decimated. They lost that hardcore group of experienced waffle players. So he's done a great job. So tough. I think the answer for those types of clubs is very astute recruiting. You've got to pick the eyes out of the VFL and the country VFL. That's where the great sort of waffle players are coming from that aren't in your zone, right? That aren't West Australians. Swan Districts have done it with Palmer and Fisher and those types. East Fremantle, to a certain extent, have done it really well. They've got to do that, and then they've got to lobby for a better deal, I think, in terms of zoning and access to players.
Fantastic. And there has been a question about the East Perth and Eagles merger in the time that you were answering that question. So we do appreciate that. We appreciate our listeners getting involved as well. We'll do this again next week. Semi-finals, the build-up to the two semis next week, and then the prelims and obviously the grand final as well. Enjoy the first weekend of the finals. Thank you very much for coming in this morning. We can't wait for next week.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to it, guys. Thanks a lot. Michael
Broadbridge in the studio on a Tuesday morning with us. We'll take a very short break. We'll be back with more in just a moment on the Sports Daily.